Bom dia!
Good morning.
Sejam todos muito bem-vindos à
We
Casa do Seguro
hope you're
na
all
COP30,
welcome
o
to
hub
House of
estratégico
Insurance at
criado por
COP30, a
conexões
strategic
empresariais
hub
e
of content,
tecnológicas. É
entrepreneur
a
connection,
plataforma
and
global
businesses
para
created to
seguros e
promote the role of the
administração de
insurance
risco.
sector towards the
Eu
climate
sou
transition.
Luísa Chediek.
My name is
Obrigada
Luisa
pela
Shadziak.
presença de todos.
Thank you for being here.
Durante todos os dias de programação, vamos receber autoridades
During all
governamentais
these
e
days of our agenda,
empresariais,
we'll be
além de representantes de
welcomed and
organizações
be
internacionais.
received by government
Durante toda a
representatives and
COP, não
representatives
farão
of
nenhuma tradução
international
simultânea.
organizations.
Os
All
participantes
the
apenas
panels
farão
will have
interpretação
simultaneous
simultânea
translations.
necessária.
You
Se
can have
desejar
and get your
usá-los,
headset at the
solicitá-los
entrance of the
no chat
auditorium. Please
chat.
feel free to get
A
them
programação
when you need it.
completa da
The
casa
full
pode ser
agenda at House of
pode ser
Insurance at
acessada no
COP30
site
can be accessed on the website
casadoseguro.org.br que
or
aparece
through
na
the
nossa
QR
tela.
code that is on our screen right
Os
now.
empoderadores da casa
The group of
podem identificar
empowers of the House is
qualquer
formed by
relação de
companies
mudança
that
climática.
develop an
Nós te
important
dissemos
role in
para
climate
trazer
change with
ESG.
concrete actions
Nesta
towards
manhã,
the
a programação
ESG
especial
agenda.
será da Porto, que
This
discutirá o
morning, we'll
papel da
have
Casa
Porto that
financeira
will
na
discuss the
transição
role of the
para
financial
uma
market and
economia
insurance sector
circular.
towards the transition for a low
Esse
carbon
painel
economy
foca nos
and how the
desafios
insurers
que o
can
Brasil
measure
precisa
and
enfrentar
manage their
para manter a
emissions, their
estabilidade
insurance
e
emissions,
combater os
analyzing
desafios
opportunities
climáticos
and
da
challenges
economia
towards
brasileira.
climate adaptation in
Nosso
Brazilian
primeiro
economy.
painel do dia é
Our first
intitulado
panel of the day
Processo de
is called The
quantificação
Process
e
of Accounting
Mensuração da
for
Emissão
and
de
Mitigating
GHG no setor de seguros.
GHG emissions in
É
the
um
insurance
estudo do
sector.
PCAF no
Case
Brasil.
study of
O painel
PCAF
apresentado
implementation in
é um
Brazil.
caso prático
This
de
panel
como
will
os
present a
seguradores podem
practical
medir
case
e
study on how
mensurar
insurers
as
can
emissões
measure and manage their insured
de gases
emissions,
climáticos.
contributing to the transition to a low carbon economy.
Convido ao palco
I would like to invite
Patrícia
to the
Coimbra,
stage
diretora de
Patricia
Gente e
Coimbra,
Cultura
Director of
da
People
Porto.
and Culture from Porto.
Butch Bacani, Head de
Bucci
Seguros da
Bacani, Head of
CNseg.
Insurance from United Nations Environment Program.
Bruna Araújo, Gerente de
Bruna
Finanças
Araújo,
Sustentáveis da
Sustainable
Way Carbon.
Finance Manager from Way Carbon.
Cláudia Trindade Prates,
Cláudia
Gerente de
Trindade Prates,
Sustentabilidade da
Sustainability
CNseg.
Director at CNseg.
Obrigada, o palco é de
Thank
vocês.
you. The floor is yours.
Bom dia a todos.
Good morning,
Segunda-feira, eu até estava
everyone.
brincando no
Monday
sábado, porque
morning, I
todo
was even
sábado
joking
aqui a gente
around
está aqui
yesterday
na
because
COP,
we are
então
here
tem
every day at
esse
Copy
radinho.
pretty much. Every day
E a
there's
gente
something
hoje,
going on, but we are
uma
starting
semana
our week
bastante animada,
officially.
com
It's going
vários
to be a
eventos.
very
Vamos
exciting
começar hoje
agenda
com
full
uma
of great
conversa
events and panels. And
bem
now we're going to
prática,
begin a conversation about a
todo
practical
mundo aqui
case.
sabe que em
I think that
Brasília
all of you
a
know
gente
that
tem
1.5
alcançado
degrees
e
has been
trabalhando para
effectively
manter esse grau e meio
reached,
e
and now we are
tentar
working
reduzir
towards to
mais.
keep that one
Qual o
and a
papel
half
do setor
degrees and try
financeiro,
to
dos
reduce further.
gerenciadores
And
de
what's the
risco?
role of the
É
financial
ajudar
and
na
insurance
mitigação,
sector?
na
It's pretty
redução
much to
das
help
emissões de
with the
gases
mitigation in
estufas.
reducing the
Como as
GHG gas
seguradoras
emissions.
podem induzir
But
isso?
how can insurance
E como o
help to
CNseg
promote that
trabalhar
work?
para isso?
How can
Primeiro,
it work towards that?
contabilizando.
Well, first,
E a Porto fez trabalho
accounting
pioneiro
for.
aqui no
And
Brasil
Porto
na
has done a
contabilização
very pioneer
das emissões de escopo 3,
important
que nós
work
chamamos
about
aqui das
the
emissões
scope
seguráveis, no
3
caso,
emissions
que
that are pretty
são
much
as
the
emissões
insurance emissions.
gerenciáveis,
For financial sector, they call
são
financial emissions,
gerenciáveis,
and the
e a
insurance
gente também vai
sector
conversar sobre um
account for
case
insurance ones, and we're going to
de
talk
qual
about
foi o
a
gás que a
effective
gente pode
practical
reduzir
case
para que
and
nós
what
clientes
was what we learned with it and how can we
Então,
help
eu vou
our customers
começar a
to
passar a
reduce their
palavra para o
emissions as
Butch,
well.
para ele
So
falar
let
um
me start
pouquinho
calling
do
Butch here for
PSI, da
him to talk
atuação
about
da
PSI
COP30
and
no
the work at
Brasil
Nepify
mesmo,
here in
como
Brazil and
são os
around the
dados que são
world, and how their
importantes para
practical cases are important for
contabilizar
us
e
to start
induzir alguns
accounting for
gastos
and
na
inducing
redução
for
das
best
emissões de
practices in
gases de
reducing
esgoto
GHG emissions.
gases.
Thank you, Butch.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. I think number one, I'm very happy that there's a session like this here. Congratulations to Porto. I wish there were already more companies on stage, but it's good that there's one on stage because I think this topic of emissions reduction is really important. It's definitely enshrined in the Paris Agreement in addition to adaptation. So what I can say about the work of UNEP in general is that for many years, we have looked at how sustainability issues could impact insurance business. And we've looked at that in different ways. How climate change could impact insurance portfolios and also investment portfolios. And what I can say is that the evolution of the work on insurance has started from largely adaptation and resilience. And that's still the case in many initiatives across the world, where insurance is viewed as a way to help absorb financial shocks from the physical impacts of climate change. And that's absolutely important. I'm not taking away anything from that. We need to close the protection gap, and we need to do every effort, make every effort to make sure that we close the protection gap across the world because of climate change impacts and also nature loss and also the vulnerability of communities out there. However, if we only deal with the impacts, then we are missing out on addressing root causes of climate change. And one of the root causes is greenhouse gas emissions. Another cause is nature loss. Other causes would be poor land use planning and disaster preparedness, etc. So if we continue simply coping with the physical impacts of climate change, it's like a bathtub that's overflowing and then you're mopping it without closing the tap. So what we've done at UNEP is that we have built on the work of insurers on building resilience and adapting to climate change to actually expanding that work where we view insurance to be similar to any financial activity like lending or investment, where insurance not only absorbs financial shocks, it also enables economic activities. And those activities could be sustainable or unsustainable. So if you look at finance and insurance, we can have a simple formula and think about where finance goes or where insurance goes. So does emissions reduction or emissions, depending on where you put it. And where finance or insurance goes nature positive outcomes or nature negative outcomes. Or where finance and insurance goes resilience or vulnerability. So I think what we've done is expand on the resilience agenda. And at some point, we conceptualize the role of insurance in decarbonization. So the sustainable insurance agenda created derivatives, including net zero insurance, transition insurance, and nature positive insurance. These are complementary to other insurance concepts like inclusive insurance and climate risk insurance. But it shows that insurers can actually do a lot more in addition to adaptation and resilience, which is absolutely important. So what happened in 2021 is that we created work on insurance and net zero. And I can tell you that at that time that we created that work, there was no PCAF, there was no emissions accounting standard for insurance. There was only something for investment through different initiatives, the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, and also for finance emissions, the PCAF Financial Emissions Standard. So we actually wrote to PCAF and actually asked them, aren't you going to develop an insured emissions accounting standard? And now that we have a group of insurers who are willing to work with you, and the answer was yes. They were happy to work with us. And we said, we want you to do that because you are the standard setter, but we're happy to contribute the insurers whom we're working with to support that agenda. So that was 2021 and 2022. The PCAF Insured Emission Standard was released in November 2022. So we can somewhat say that UNEP's work initiated the work on insured emission standard. And we didn't stop there. We looked at the PCAF work and also looked at how insurers could look at developing target setting methods for underwriting portfolios. In addition to already methods that were available for investments of insurers. And last but not the least, last year we established a new initiative called the Forum for Insurance Transition to Net Zero. And this new initiative called the FIT, which is separate from the PSI, it's separately governed, it's independent of the PSI, has now produced the global guidance on transition plans by insurance companies, on underwriting initially, and investment. And if you look at transition plans for corporates or insurance companies, transition plans include governance, metrics and targets, which include insured emissions or finance emissions on investment, as well as strategies to engage with your customers. So we can pretty much say that UNEP is involved in all of this work and has been advancing this agenda. And this is why we're so happy that it has reached Brazil, and we actually have a case study to discuss today.
Muito obrigada, Butch. Assim, o que você
Thank you
colocou
so
em
much,
relação ao
Butch.
PCAF
And what you said about PCAF
é trabalho em construção.
is definitely a work under construction.
Eu acho que a gente vai poder discutir isso.
That's what I think we'll be able to discuss here today as well, and the participation of UNEP in doing that, and the insurers and banks are all important in order for us to build this methodology, this accounting in a more tropicalized manner, in the case of Brazil, of course, because PCAF have their international standards, and the more Brazil participates in it, the better we can uniformize it, right? And I think we're going to be able to hear more about Patricia, and especially what was the experience of the path of the improvements in accounting for emissions and what we need to improve in order for us to all build a work together, because the real sector needs to decarbonize and we are helpers for that. So Patricia, I would like to hear a little bit about your experience and the experience of Porto, and how was that, and what do you think about the path so far? Good morning, everyone. Again, great to have such a diverse audience here with us. We have different associations, brokers, CNseg with the insurers. So it's a good example, definitely, of what we need to do and to work towards that transition and do it successfully. So I'd just like to thank all of you for being here. And now, to talk about Porto specifically, Porto is a somewhat 80 years old company. It's known as Porto Seguro or Porto Insurance, but in the past years, in the past 5 years, has become Porto Group, because we have the insurance company, we have a bank, we have health and services too. And that makes so that methodology becomes more complex, because when we're talking about Scope 3, Category 15, it talks about all our portfolio financed and insured. So it's more complex, but it's because of that that is so important. So all this work, basically, let me just touch on this briefly, because it's important to know where this came from and why it's so important. So let me just briefly talk about where this came and why the relevancy and the importance and the urgency of it, and how and what we learned from this process. And then later we can finally work with that alongside Bruna, which was one of our biggest partners at Weigh Carbon, and she will share more information about the methodology and the process. So to talk about Porto now specifically, we have this 5 years cycles, and during these cycles in which we revise our industry, we did something called Regenera, which is a public document in which we are working in 4 pillars. First pillar would be the development of people and social inclusion. The second pillar, we talk about climate change and circularity. The third pillar is about products and solutions that are sustainable, and fourth, the value chain. And all of those pillars talk precisely about this type of work, because it's impossible to manage without measuring it. And it's hard to measure when we are not only measuring our impact, but also the impact of what we have out there when we are insuring and financing banks,
toda a parte de carros,
all the part of vehicles,
residências,
homes,
investimento,
investments as well, because we do have an asset in investing companies. So all this impact, that's the complex about it, in measuring all of this. So we have evolved quite a lot in terms of the PCAF methodology, like Claudia has said, which is NOA Carbon helped us doing this, but there's also a lot of learning that helped within the organization. Because how can we work with this type of data and all this data? What's the granularity of it? And we need a lot of internal engagement from the company, right? It's not just a work from the sustainability area. It's a work that should be done by the entire company. So there's a lot of active working. We have even Patrícia Chacon here, the CEO of an insurance company that's going to be in the next panel. She was a huge partner, but we also had a lot of partners in all the different type of work fronts. And here is something that needs to be shared in order for all of you to evolve in your journey as well. Because it's a big commitment from the leadership of the company. It starts there, the shareholders and the executives of the company. All of them need to say, this is urgent, this impacts our business, it impacts our society, we need to make this happen. So we had a high level of engagement. It was, of course, hard to determine the granularity of data, and working with data is something that never ends. It's not like we did it and that's it. It's something that we need to continue to study, because if we cannot have good enough data, and again, not even have the goals, but at least an overall direction that fosters this type of transition, it's something ongoing. So basically, this was a conversation that started, it's still going, and that needs to continue to happen in terms of refining data, working data, and definitely right now, with that type of measuring, we're finally able to identify how we model differently, how can we work with solutions in order to mitigate, solutions to adapt. So you see, there's a huge path ahead of us. And what we are definitely happy to see as a team is that it was an engagement for the entire organization. And maybe that's one of the hardest challenges at the end of the day, right? We have the method, we have the expertise, we have data, of course, as an insurance company, and with CNseg as well, always continue to do a work with the data to help the insurance companies and society in the sense of mitigation and sharing data with city halls, with the state. That's definitely the path forward for us to be able to help society. So I think the last, I would like to end this answer right now by saying that here is more about the important work of raising the relevance of this agenda at the highest spheres of the organization, in working together with the society. And House of Insurance is a good example of how we do that. We have insurance companies here, but we are representing the entire insurance market, because we want to get together and do it together. Because if we do it by ourselves, we won't be able to do anything. We are starting the work here, but the goal is to engage more and more the insurance market. And here we also know there's the thing about financing and insurance that work alongside FEBRABAN, that work with Ambima. So again, it's not only about the insurance market, but again, the banks and assets here as well. Engagement is key in order for us to do this job and make it happen. So I'd like to thank all of Porto's team for this amazing job. Thank you so much, Patrícia. And it was really interesting when you said that, because I worked with Bruna too before coming to CNseg in banking, and the experience is engagement. That is for who we're doing this, what we're doing this for. And that creates awareness and the need for you to improve and to know what you're doing in terms of your value chain. So that awareness, I think as a whole as well, right? COP is definitely the moment of raising awareness. And I'm always very proud to see the insurance sector together, united, setting the example in Brazil, and having the entire world now looking at this type of initiatives to work towards mitigation, accounting for. So the insurance sector is definitely doing a type of showcase at COP, and hopefully we'll continue to do that for the future COPs as well. And it's all about engagement, like you said. The entire company is engaged. So I wanted to hear now from Bruna, how did that work happen? What was the methodology happen?
Maravilha. Obrigada, Cláudia. Bom dia, pessoal. Queria agradecer primeiro o convite da CNseg e o desafio que a Porto deu para o Wake Up para poder realizar esse projeto.
And the
Vocês estão me
challenge that
ouvindo
Porto
bem?
had. Are you can you hear me?
Então vou continuar. Bom,
Okay, so I'll
falando um pouquinho
continue.
de como foi.
So now a little bit about,
Esse outro microfone.
I think, let me change the mic here.
Vocês desligam, né? Oi, pessoal. Pronto. Ótimo. Tá melhor, né? Então tá. Então vamos lá. Bom, a gente só apresentando um pouco, né? Eu
So,
trabalho
just introducing the work. We're a Brazilian consulting company of solutions and sustainability, and we have digital products and also software to manage greenhouse gases and climatic risks. So we've been working with the financial sector in this decarbonization, so climatic strategy. And the work with Porto works with measuring of the emissions of carbon. So maybe not everybody knows what we're talking about. So we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions that are attributed to the insurance companies or the banks or the investment manager. So the logic is to work with scopes 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 are direct emissions. Scope 2 is what you acquire. Scope 3 is from the upstream and downstream of the chain. So the great challenge that Porto brought was to do scope 1 and 2, the novelty of scope 3. So most of the companies, they work only with fragmented portions of scope 3. Scope 3 is very difficult to measure. There's complexity in the collection and treatment of data that is relevant. And the challenge that Porto brought was to calculate category 15, which is scope 3. And these are emissions for banks and also for the managers. So Porto brought this complexity because we covered the 3 verticals. So we worked with Porto Asset, we worked with Porto Bank and Porto Seguro. And within the insured scope, this is pioneering work from Porto, probably one of the first in Latin America. As Butch said, we have a technical limitation. It was developed in 2022, and at the end of 2022, it doesn't cover all of the classics. So we still have a long way to go. Claudia knows about this. She's working with the banks. She's following this up. And we still have to disseminate this methodology so that it will include the whole portfolio of the insurance companies. And in the banks, this is a little more developed. So we brought this challenge of Porto, and these insurance companies, they are a proxy. They are a variable that we're able to make the to and from and to and for. And in the climatic risk, it is made of the risk of transition and physical risk. So physical risk is more common, it's easier to understand. It's the risk of a windstorm, of a flood, all these climatic threats. But there is a little portion that's a little more difficult to measure, which is the transition risks. And these variables that we measured over here, that we measured for Porto, they're a proxy of this sort of risk. And this risk is really something that it's not that easy to put the quantitative variable. So the risk of transition is the risk of transition for low carbon transition. So it's a change in market, a new technology, an informational risk. So this kind of information we're able to measure and create a proxy. And the great relevance is to think about the portfolio of the banks or the insurance companies. So it's not one metric for another. The use of the metric is to manage the risk, to anticipate regulatory changes. We have the carbon market. We talked a lot about that in the first week of COP and here in Casa do Seguro. And you're able to anticipate and see the impact, for example, of the carbon market inside the companies that are in your portfolio. So how much Porto is exposed, how much other insurance companies are exposed. So it's really very interesting what we can do with the data. But in fact, we're going to have a lot of work to be able to engage the companies, to be able to work inside the companies, and to be able to measure, to be able to have robust measurement. It's interesting for you to say that because Porto is an open company, and if you S2 and S1, they talk a lot about integration of data, so you have to have the data, and also transparency. And then you have reports that are comparable. It's very important for Porto to say that. It's interesting that you said it. I had not put it in my initial comments. Another point that I wanted to highlight is that in our sustainability report that we're going to launch now from 2024, a little late because of COP, only 5% of insurance companies do scope 3 because it's difficult, and the benchmarking, the learning, it's all important to pave the way. So Butch, I wanted to hear a little bit from you about the initiatives that you have led, considering the insurance companies, to move along this path of transparency and reporting. What are the initiatives that you've been using to trail this path and to look at the accountability of carbon and the reduction of emissions?
Thank you. Before I answer that, I think people get confused sometimes when you talk about all of this work about emissions accounting. But the big picture is that we need to get to net zero emissions. That is the finish line. The sooner we get to net zero, the better, because the less warming. The later it will be more warming. So it doesn't matter if we get to net zero tomorrow, we will still continue feeling the physical impacts of climate change. So the finish line is net zero. And it's just a simple time horizon. Is it 5 years, 10 years, 2050? The longer it takes, the worse climate change will become. And if you look at science, in 2018, the IPCC already said that at 1.5-degree warming compared to 2 degrees, the best case scenario for coral reefs, tropical coral reefs, would be 70 to 90% will be gone. And the latest science shows that because we already breached 1.5 temporarily last year, it's not permanent. We may have already crossed the temperature tipping point for warm water coral reefs. This shows that there is a hard limit to adaptation, meaning at a certain point, you cannot adapt anymore because it's impossible to reverse it already. So this is why I think, yes, it doesn't mean we should stop adapting. We should continue adapting. We should also continue reducing emissions, because that is the only way we can be more resilient and sustainable going forward. Secondly, on terms of initiatives, we already mentioned the initial engagement with PCAF before. That has led to this standard. And I think PCAF is expanding that work to cover other lines of insurance and also claims and treaty reinsurance as well. We've also been engaging through the Forum for Insurance Transition, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which has a different purpose from PCAF. It provides science-based methods for insurers and financial institutions to set emissions reduction targets for their underwriting, investment, or lending portfolios. And then there's the FIT on transition plans, which is even wider than what the topic today, because any transition plan has to include metrics and targets, including the ones we're discussing today. I just wanted to touch on what was said earlier by Way Carbon. I can tell you that when this work initiated in 2022, it was very difficult and challenging. It's very new, even for many leading global insurers. At the end of the day, nothing in this world that matters comes easy. So there is a reason for doing this, but I think we need to understand the purpose of it. Emissions accounting is one way to have greater transparency of how your business is contributing to the net zero agenda. It's also a way to better understand how you can adapt your business as the world transitions from a high carbon to a net zero emissions economy. And I can tell you, when we started dealing with leading insurers a few years ago, very few had really thought through what would be the implications on their underwriting portfolio when we go from high carbon to net zero. And then it also allows you to look into what are products you can start developing to support that transition. And then ultimately, the work of PCAF could also help you set your own targets. There are several caveats that I wanted to share that's important. Number one, we need to understand what these numbers mean. So it's very tempting to say that from one year to the other, your number, the emissions, insured emissions number increase or decrease. And then depending on who you talk to, you're not doing your job because it increased. But it could be that if you look at the economy from the brown economy, the most polluting activities, to the gray part, which is transitioning, to the green part, which are the climate solutions, it could be that Porto, for example, may be helping many companies transition to net zero business models. So if they're doing that, maybe there will be an increase in the emissions number. And there are different ways of looking at it. There's absolute emissions reduction. There's also emissions intensity. These are simply different ways of looking at the emissions profile of your portfolio. But the ultimate goal is that of all of these is to have emissions reduction in the real economy. So if Porto's, I'm just using you as an example, or ABC insurer, Porto insured portfolio says it's net zero, but it didn't lead to any emissions reductions in the real economy, that is what you call paper decarbonization. You simply decarbonize your portfolio, but it didn't make a real world impact. So the connection has to be, it has to drive emissions reduction in the real world. And it's not only everything about reduction. You can also have climate aligned activities. You can increase the proportion of your portfolio about climate solutions, nature-based solutions, renewable energy, green hydrogen, long duration, and you can also do that. So as you reduce, you can also increase the part of your portfolio that's contributing to climate solutions. So I think it's important to do that. I know it's difficult, and it could be challenging. So if you are an underwriter, for example, how have you measured climate risk before? You have measured it from an adaptation lens. So that means if there's a corporate client and you get a proposal, you will look at hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. What is the probability of loss because of this extreme weather? Now the underwriters have to learn scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So, and if you were here last Saturday for the Net Zero Nature Positive and Just Transition Day, even leading global players are continuously upskilling everyone in the company: underwriters, investment managers, board members, executive management. So I appreciate it could be difficult, but we need to get going with something with what we have. And what PCAF has produced, what UNEP has done through the FIT and other works out there on net zero insurance, the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, there is enough out there to help you start this journey. And that is where we are contributing to this agenda.
Não, Butch, foi interessante porque acho que foi no sábado que a gente também discutiu
That's
pouco
interesting,
isso.
Butch, because on Saturday we discussed this trajectory, and it was in the panel I think that Butch was in, and we talked about the trajectory, right? So you can even increase, and we can even look at the, I'd like to hear Patricia from an insurance company. I'm not from the insurance company, because the risk of transition is effective and it's well known. And how many companies that sign, sustainability issues, they have environmental insurance, looking at the impact on society. So it's an opportunity. And for now, we can increase this or not, but it's an opportunity for the insurance companies to cover risk. So how do you see this issue, Patricia, of the core business of the insurance companies in this trajectory of reducing emissions, considering everything that we've been facing in Brazil? And there were several windstorms yesterday, and the transition as well as the physical risk that has been increasing, and how you are seeing this as insurance companies in your core business to reduce this mitigation and adaptation and reduction. Well, together with our strategy, Regenera, we have internal targets and public targets in the 4 pillars I mentioned. So I'm going to mention a few. And it's not because now you're doing, there's an indicator for you to mitigate that, you're not there saying, how can we adapt, right? So it's not a sequence. It's work that we do together. But it was very important for us to do this work, the work of measuring, because it doesn't only talk about having the place we're in, but it's all the engagement we were talking about, all of this education that Butch was talking about. So what are we really talking about? Where do we want to get to? And we know that this is one step, but there are several other steps that we have to do, and it's an important pace as well that we have to use. So together with all of this work, we have been evolving, for example, in terms of our investment manager with ESG filters accelerating this process. And it's also a discussion at Porto Bank in terms of investment funding. And we also started work in Porto Seguro and in Porto Bank in insurance in terms of products and solutions that are sustainable, and how we have been working on access to ensure even more within our business, and concrete actions now of the reduction of scope 1 and 2, not only looking at Porto, but also looking at our suppliers, because we have many suppliers and vendors, and we also guide them and we engage and we encourage them. We encourage our value chain to make this transition as well, because it's not only us, right? We are inducers. Insurance companies are inducers. So when we look at our complexity, and I talk about but I'm talking about the market. So we have several of our partner brokers, and it's 45,000. It's 18 million customers, 13,000 vendors, 14,000 employees. And when we think about all of this work, the engagement of the value chain is essential. So we also have strong work engaging the suppliers and making a transition of our suppliers and partners, just like us. So we have to be the example. So then we had several initiatives that are already happening. And together with that, I think it's essential for us to have our targets and our missions, and this is our public target and our internal target. And also many of our executives, they also have these targets inside their planning. And that's the important work that we've been doing in terms of engagement. And then we go back to point number 1. Without engagement, we're not going to be able to do it, and we're not going to be able to have strength to do it. Yeah, you have to talk about that. Exactly. The value chain is extremely important. And as you know, Patricia, we're working inside you in CNseg, and we're looking at the value chain to provide a basis for our discussion with the Brazilian taxonomy and insurance and Brazilian taxonomy. So talking about this engagement chain. So Bruno, I'd like to hear about Way Carbon, about your work with regard to the insurance companies. So only 5% are doing scope 3. So it's the learning. And I'd like to hear from you. How do you see this engagement in this trajectory and Way Carbon and everything you're doing here? Okay, Claudia, so I think we have this, in our conception, this shyness comes from two main points. So one is feeding the method, as Butch has already said. The methodology is new and we're actually developing and applying it at the same time. So once again, I'd like to congratulate the courage to do this, and there's the technical feeding of the data. So when Patricia talks about engagement inside Porto, we have to talk to many different areas, and you have to sensitize these areas. So why am I going to extract my data in a different way? I have one way of doing it, it works. Why am I going to do it in a different way? So that the basis would be the way it should be to be able to calculate and to apply the method. So many areas were involved, and sensitization and understanding of extraction from the base, and there's internal work done in the company that moves lots of people. The volume of data is absurd. We're talking about thousands of lines. Every line has a lot of information on it about the operation of the company, and we're still talking about the construction of emission factors. I'm talking about data of the national inventory, the inventory of each company that is, insured by Porto or other insurance companies. So the volume, that's why Patricia talked about this. And then the volume is huge, and the way that we do it is new, and it's, you need to know about this. I was talking to Vivi from Porto. When we work with the agro portfolio, you have to look at specific things about the cultures, the geographical location of these cultures. So it's a lot of work. So one of the reasons for us to understand why the sector is still starting, that's it. Because, this methodological feeding and also the perception of value about the agenda. So once again, congratulations, CNseg, for Casa do Seguro, because it's a way of bringing insurance companies that are at different levels of maturity about this climatic agenda, bringing them into the discussion. So there's the perception of value, and to understand, okay, I'm going to have to collect all of this data, treat the data, sensitize several teams, putting this over to sustainability issues, and I'm going to hire a consulting company like Waycommon to do this. And why am I going to do this? What is the benefit this is going to bring me? So I wanted to bring a little bit of this change in view. So coming out of the view of only regulatory compliance, I'm doing it because I have to do it, because there's IFRS, because there's CG 193, there's GRSAC from Central Bank. But look at this agenda as an opportunity. It's not only compliance. Of course, compliance is involved. We have to follow it, of course, but there's the opportunity, because this measuring, what this brings, the knowledge this brings to the insurance companies, to the banks, to anticipate, as I said, is understand why this is going to help you and why it would be interesting to create insurance for carbon credits or for reforestation. BNDES talked about this last week about the agenda of reforestation. In insurance, we don't have this market, and it's fundamental for Brazil to be able to follow the ODCs. So definitely, we're still investing a lot in terms of degraded areas. We need the insurance companies providing insurance for the reforestation of these areas, just like we need the banks, BNDES, and others providing credit for these areas.
Eu tenho uma visão muito holística sobre o papel do setor segurador. Eu penso no setor segurador junto com o crédito, junto com as garantias, junto com o mercado de capitais, todos eles, como o Butch comentou também.
So everything, like Butch said, they are working to work on that, to get to net zero. So I think there's the perception of the agenda and showing this. So we have the backup and Way Carbon to be able to, see how we can adapt these methodologies. And we also have what we can do with the data. So the risk management and the transition risk. So Claudia, we are seeing the interest of the insurance sector going up.
é isso, né? O setor bancário está um pouco mais à frente, o Banco Central
The
tá um pouco
banking
mais à frente
system
também
is
em
a bit
termos
ahead of
de
that
regulação, e a gente está vendo
in
a
terms of
SUSEP fazendo esse
regulation, and we're looking at
movimento, né?
SUSEP
A
also
SUSEP está
working on
envolvida
that.
com economia
SUSEP is
brasileira,
involved in
tem a
Brazilian
definição
taxonomy.
seguro de
There's a
sociedade, então a gente
conception, the
está vendo
definition of
os
sustainable
movimentos dos
insurance. We're
reguladores e
basically
dos
looking at the
investidores
movement of
também nesse sentido,
regulators
né?
and
Empresas que tenham essa
investors,
preocupação
looking
de
for
fato ter
companies that are
esses dados
concerned with this and
mensurados,
that
né? E é
have that
importante que a gente mensure
data.
para isso, né?
It's
O que
important
a
for us
gente
to
consegue medir,
measure
a
all
gente
of that,
consegue gerir e a
because
gente consegue
once we
fazer
measure it,
essa
we can
então,
manage it and do
da visão que a
something
gente tem há
about it. So
anos,
that's a
como a
little bit
gente
of
tem
how we see
trabalhado,
things,
que a
the way
gente vai
carbon, how we
conseguir
have been
perceber
working. And
o papel
again,
do seguro
we
é muito
believe that the
importante
role of insurance is
nessa tríade, né, de
extremely
mercado
important
bancário,
in
né,
this
de crédito
connection
e
between
seguros,
carpet
e o net zero. E aí,
market
quando eu falo
capital,
do net zero,
insurance, and
das
financing.
empresas que vocês
And this is
fazem
not
esse
about the
estudo
net
são as
zero of
próprias
the
seguradoras. Você fala
insured
da trajetória de
companies.
net zero do país, né?
I'm
Porque
talking
também são as
about the
nossas emissões.
path
A
of the
questão está
entire
aberta
country in
depende da
following
ambição
the
climática
goals.
de cada empresa, o que por sua vez depende muito desse
What,
entendimento e dessa
in its way,
sensibilização.
depending
Então,
on
eu
understanding
vou medir as suas
the
emissões
issue.
nesse
So I'm
dia,
going
sua
to measure
produção
the
e a alta
emissions. I'm going to
liderança da
give you
empresa
that
vai ter que tomar
information,
essa
and the
decisão
high
tomada.
leadership of the
E qual o
company
grau
can
de
take a
ambição que a
listening,
empresa
informed
tem para
decision in
trabalhar para onde
establishing
quer ir. Então,
the
a
ambition
estratégia
goal
vai
of the
vir muito
company where it wants
dessa
to go.
decisão
So strategy
tomada. Então, assim, o
depends a
que a
lot
gente
on
está vendo
informed
interesse
decision.
aumentando,
We have seen
é
that
trabalhar muito nessa
interest
limitação da empresa.
raising. You want to
Por
work
exemplo,
towards
hoje
the
a gente tem construído ferramentas mais
reducing the
automáticas ali que
technical
ajudam nesse
difficulties.
custo
We have
operacional.
been building
Cláudia,
tools,
né,
more
sabe a
automated
importância
tools in
disso
order
para o
to
processo,
help
o
the
tamanho, o
companies.
volume de
Claudia
operações
knows
gigantes
the
que a gente precisou,
size of the
de certa forma,
operations
automatizar
of a
para
bank that we
funcionar.
needed to automate in a way
Power
to
BI
make
que
it
a gente
easy
fez
for
para
us,
isso, né,
like the
fazer
Power BI that we created
trabalhando
for
esses dados de
Porto
forma mais
in order
rápida
to
e até
work
o
with this
custo
data faster
oneroso
and
do time
then
de
make it a bit
sustentabilidade que
cheaper
opera esses
for the
dados. Então, a gente
sustainability
está vendo
team that
muito
work with all
esse
this
caminho
data.
da
So again,
contabilidade de
we are
carbono
seeing this
trazer
path
essa
ahead of us of
facilitar
accounting
essa
for carbon,
caminhada e
make
essa
it easy
mudança
for the
da
awareness of the
estratégia.
overall agenda and building the strategy.
Vai ter que acontecer também porque vai ter que
Yes, and that
ter
needs to
muita
happen
cadeia de
because we have
valor,
small and
não?
medium-sized
E a
companies. There's a
ferramenta
value
são
chain
os
involved, and
está aí e pequena e média empresa entra na cadeia de valor.
these companies are part of this value chain, and it's a cost. Tools are extremely important to do that. So again, I'm really happy to hear what Bruna just said, because it's pretty much what we have been doing at Ambima, Febraban, bringing everyone on board. Maybe align data, because if financial sector work together, we can also help in using that data and creating tools in order to make for the math to be simpler or easier. And I remember that I was talking with Febraban the other day that the insurance sector needs to come in. We have the regulator sector, but again, climate is risk, and insurance are there to cover risks. So we need to be more and more present. The insurance sector needs to be more part of it and not run away from it because you will be raising your emissions one year or the other, like Butch said. We need to reduce emissions and somewhat increase it so we can try to build and hold some cases with some companies, with some projects, in order to avoid potential environmental damages or insurance damages that we need to cover the risk effectively, not run away from that risk. Look at that as opportunity. So, Patricia, I'd like to now maybe ask you to talk to us and tell us what do you think is going to be the next 2 years, not the 5 or 10, but for the next 2 years for this agenda of accounting for and the emissions of GHG, and what's your vision for the upcoming future? So right now, this is a very important moment, us being here at COP30. This is the house of insurance, more and more working together, talking with banks, with managers. So I usually don't like to look that far ahead. I prefer to stick to the present most of the times, because it's now that we build for the future. If we think what's going to know ahead, we might get lost, right? So I try to invest in the now. We're investing in the now. It's how we can work in an integrated manner and intentionally in order to work towards this agenda. And I have been seeing important steps being taken so far. And I also needed to say that it's very important that we are building and measuring things together, because like we said, it's a type of literacy, it's a type of increasing in the sensibility of the urgency of the matter. So to talk about that here at the House of Insurance and working alongside other insurers, it's a very important step. Also, it's important to mention that we are doing an integrated type of work, and it's a very pragmatic one. So at least we at Porto, everything, we have lots of goals and targets for business. It's not for only sustainability. It's business as a whole. And that prepares us towards the IFRS 1 and 2. So we also have a very important work here to measure and assess the risk and align the organizational and businesses risks alongside the SDGs. So I truly see that this is an important work in us working with products and solutions that are sustainable with mitigation and adaptation actions that can really manage the risk and the challenge that is here happening right now. It's not going to happen in the future. It's already happened. So I see us working together in order to work towards the mitigation and adaptation agenda as soon as possible.
But depois da fala da Patrícia, eu vou passar a palavra.
After what Patricia just said, I also wanted to place Amplify in this agenda, this collective work of insurance companies in order to reduce the emission and work towards climatic mitigation around the world.
So I think in my vision would be by 2030, where are we now? 2025? I think all insurers should have total balance sheet transition plans that is supporting net zero, supporting adaptation, supporting the nature positive transition, supporting the just transition, and financial inclusion. And that would include using both underwriting and investment portfolios to make that transition to an inclusive, resilient, and sustainable economy. There's one thing that I missed out earlier, which I think I wanted to share as well. Sometimes in a lot of these discussions on underwriting, we forget about claims. I think I mentioned it in one of the sessions last Saturday that globally, the insurance industry pays around $5 to $5.5 trillion of claims every year across all lines. If you think about sustainable claims management, if you repair instead of replace, if you build back greener using sustainable materials, we can reduce emissions, we can build resilience, we can reduce pollution as well. The other thing that I wanted to share is that it may seem very new now for Porto to be doing this, but when we launched the Principles for Stable Insurance in 2012 in Rio, no one knew how to implement them. Very few companies had a sustainability risk management framework or strategy. So many of these companies evolve over time that you're going to be odd today if you don't have a sustainability strategy. In other markets, you're going to be odd if you do not have a fossil fuel policy or deforestation policy. So it may seem that there's only one or two, but at some point, the rest of the market will follow. So we've seen that time and again. And I think if you are a company, you do not want to be a laggard there. You will also miss the opportunity and the wave of this transition. And I don't think you want to be a dinosaur in this exercise. And last but not the least, through many engagements I've had across different parts of the globe, I think it's important for insurers. There's always this question of that insurers are very poor in communicating their value proposition. And I think we need to do a better job on that. But there's also some very practical reasons. So yes, I think if you think about financial inclusion, and inclusive insurance and financial resilience, it's important that we help people recover from disease or disaster. But in a way, it's a very sad story when you think about insurance, because if you only talk to your clients about losses, it's always a sad story. But we know it's terribly important. It makes a big difference in people's lives. In addition to that, if you can communicate that how you're contributing to that, that's already very good. But if you can communicate even further and tell the generation alpha that we are here because we are also helping address root causes of climate change and reducing emissions and reversing nature loss, you are also positioning yourself as a company to be the employer and insurer of choice, because the young generation will no longer question whether you're doing net zero or emissions accounting or nature positive accounting. They will not question that because they know that their future is dependent on a sustainable world. So I think, and lastly, for my own perspective as a father, I have two young daughters. I'm waiting for the time that they grow up, and I want to be prepared and when they question me on what I did on this agenda, because I know that what I do now, the decisions we make right now will impact their future going forward.
Depois dessa fala, praticamente.
So
finalizou.
after that, we are pretty much done with the panel, right? But Bruno, you will have the right job now after what Butch and Patricia said. Now it's up to you, Bruno, to close the panel. But remember, the insurance is inclusiveness, is inclusivity, right? And during your work, maybe you could also mention a little bit about inclusion, just like Butch mentioned and Patricia as well. I think it's also really important for the insurance sector to be seen as a sector that adds protection, that adds new money when an event happens in terms of course, adaptation and coverage. So inclusion and future, the insurance sector is more and more important in that, and the role that you have in helping the engagement, because as a consultant, you go there, you do the math. It's a type of engagement, like Patricia mentioned at the beginning. So this outlook for the future generations and inclusivity is very important. So Bruna, now it's up to you. Thank you, Claudia. Pretty much, I will just echo what Butch said. And you also mentioned something that I wanted to say, that it was the agenda of decarbonization for the insurance sector, because we're talking a lot about measuring emissions, but that has two important axes that you work quite a lot at CNseg. That is the protection gap, that is completely connected to climatic agenda. It might not seem that directly connected, but it is. And the agenda for climatic resilience as a whole. So in order for us to have a transition, the transition needs to be fair. In order to be fair, we need to reduce the lack of the protection gap and work towards resilience. So I think it's not only about thinking about mitigation and reducing the emission, but also opening and raising more awareness towards resilience and the reduction of gap in order for us to bring people towards transition, everyone, because we know the impact of climatic change. It's worse, it's more severe at more unassisted population. So we want to work towards a fair transition, and we understand the role of the insurance sectors in all of this. And there's also something else that I wanted to mention here. I remember that you asked Patricia about her vision for the future. She mentioned her vision for the present. So I would like to talk about our vision for the future. I think that at COP30, if we could be here, maybe not here, Belém, but another city, what I would like to see at COP30, that capture of carbon should be already part of the insurance as a whole, that it shouldn't be even a topic for a panel, that's already something that was acknowledged and incorporated to the world of insurance. And another thing that will be important to see in the future is the sector offering more and more products that are customized that could support towards this transition in the economy. Again, I usually like to tell my team that we want to leave this compliance vision towards a more opportunistic view because we do understand that new technologies are going to arise. New technologies that need new type of insurances. We need the correct insurance for all of that. So it's important to have this open vision and bring towards the new business models other things and bring that as well for our business strategy. So that is a decision that goes through the CEO of the company, just like we have any other decisions to be part of. So my speech wasn't as beautiful as Patricia's or Butch, but thank you nonetheless. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was great to be here hosting a panel with all of you. And let's move on. Let me invite, oh, let's take a picture together, of course.
Obrigada a todos vocês pela participação
Thank
nesse
you,
primeiro
all of you,
painel.
for participating in this first panel.
Segmento, a nossa
Now,
programação
moving on with our agenda, I'd like to tell you that at 6 p.m., Porto would like to invite all of you for a cocktail.
aguardamos por vocês.
We'll be waiting all of you there.
O assunto do próximo painel é
The subject of the second panel is the role of the financial market in climate adaptation, opportunities, challenges, and impact on the Brazilian economy.
o objetivo.
The objective of the panel is to discuss the role the financial market plays in climate adaptation, addressing the opportunities, challenges, and impact on the Brazilian economy.
Convida ao palco.
I would like to invite to the stage Patricia Chacon, CEO of Porto Seguro. Luciana Nicola, Director of Institutional Relations and Sustainability for Itaú. Inamara Santos Melo, Director of the Department of Adaptation and Resilience Policies at Brazil's National Secretary for Climate Change at MMA. Denise Hills, Market Specialist and Advisor for Porto. The floor is yours. Thank you. Hello, good morning, everyone. Let's start the second week at COP. We are very excited. We are halfway there, and it's a pleasure to be welcoming so many amazing women, Patricia, Lucy, and Inamara, to talk about the role of the financial sector. In the first panel, we saw that what we could create together could help the market and foster change in the market. We have three people with very different point of views about government, the role of the banks and the insurers to talk about that. So let me start by introducing myself first. I have been working at Porto for 2 years as part of the board, and I also part as a specialist and advisor for Ambima in the subjects of climate and biodiversity, and I've been falling for this for a long time, since 2010, as a member of the financial market. So I'd like to start by asking first to start with the first round of questions. So Patricia, Luciana, and Amara first present themselves, talk about what they are doing, and a little bit of their contribution in the agenda that we have been discussing at COP about the role of the financial institution to foster such practices. So Patricia, please, the floor is yours. Thank you, Denise. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here representing Porto at this panel. My name is Patricia. I work as Chief Operating Officer at Porto Seguro. And Porto is an organization that for 80 years have been working with the mission and the essence of being a safe haven for people and their dreams. That means that our insurance company, we live and we fight for a mission to support our clients and communities to recover and rebuild when something unforeseen happens. We have been seeing in the past years the impact of climate for the population. And we frequently ask ourselves, how can we support our community to make our clients and our community as a whole more resilient? And I'd like to start by saying, Denise, that we as Porto understand that this is a mission that we can only achieve together, acting as a group. That's why we're very happy to be part here at the House of Insurance. The House of Insurance has been really special to show the role of the insurance sector when we join our efforts and how we do it and work it together towards the economic development and climatic resistance. We're also here today as members, signatories of the PCI. So we are here part of the Insurance Development Forum, the ICP, the IDF, in working towards climatic change. So it's very happy to be here from Porto to discuss such an important agenda that it is climatic resilience. Right, and it's not only a topic and the agenda. It's important to imagine about our network and increasing the resilience of the system and reducing the impacts and sharing the knowledge that we have towards this transformation. So Lu, please, Itaú, Unibanco, and your agenda. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here besides so many great partners in different initiatives. So at Itaú, I work at the Institutional Relations and Sustainability. So now they work together because we have from the sustainability agenda all our strategy at ESG that has a medium to long-term strategy supported by 3 pillars. One for sustainable financing, where we have been working in trying to find how do we channel financial resources for sustainable projects of our clients. We do believe a lot in journey, and we believe that that is an agenda that cannot leave anyone behind and should not. So we have a huge project in engaging our customers, and for the customers that are already engaged, we are thinking of how we bring more innovation in their products and services, because we're talking about an agenda that we also still have a lot to learn. We not always have scalable projects, so we can always be 100% sure on what we do and put in our risk engine. So we're always betting, trying to find opportunities and how we bring financial incentives for that transition to happen. On top of that, we have a pillar towards sustainability and development. So beyond our projects for gender and racial inequalities inside the bank and to the external civil society as a whole, by getting financial resource and giving voice to people who are already doing an important job in that agenda, we have also been developing entrepreneurship, and we have been looking at what type of layers of the entrepreneurship we can get more financial resources, more knowledge, and even work as advisors sometimes. We know that in Brazil, we become entrepreneurs because of necessity, very much less because of opportunity. So the role of the bank is to go beyond credit. How do we help entrepreneur women, even an agenda that was created by my predecessor, Denise Hills, which created an amazing thing for us at the bank. So looking at the entrepreneurship of people who are 50 plus, because we're going to have more people aging healthier, so we'll have a different journey ahead of us. And the third pillar that we have is the pillar about climatic transition. That is a super important agenda. Itaú has adhered to the Net Zero Bank Alliance in 2021, and we began our journey of public being committed towards that. And we have been working at the ecosystem as a whole, like Patricia just said, because when we talk about climate, we're talking about mitigation, adaptation. No one can do that at that level by itself. So you need to bring the knowledge that we have to understand the pain points for our customers and in the sector, and you need to be able to count on everyone, with the public power, with the academy, sometimes even with our competitors. I have Fabi from Bank Bradesco, but we have been doing that together, even at Febraban. to understand how banks together can create standards, how can you work at a very transparent agenda in order for us to help the sector as a whole to be more resilient during this process, and how, as banks, we're not a very intensive carbon sector, which for us, the challenge that makes us being responsible to help decarbonizing our clients. What we finance right now is 700 greater and bigger than what we have at Itaú. So if we don't help our customers decarbonize, a bank will also never be net zero. So there's a lot of work behind in terms of knowledge, engagement, in not leaving anyone behind. I am not just helping a customer to not concede credit, right? We are there to help them how much knowledge you have been acquiring regarding a decarbonization process, but be humble to say that we still have more questions than answers for a lot of the sectors of the economy. We still don't know how we're going to decarbonize a lot of the players. And we also look at big projects that in terms of implementation. We here at COP, alongside Bradesco and other companies, we are at a case, which is a house that we have been discussing concrete and scalable solutions. Because the biggest contribution that the financial institution can make is making sure we know what is already working, what is walking towards the goal of adapting and mitigation, and bringing other companies towards this sector. Great, thank you. So, Inamara, please, let me hear your vision about this subject and the challenge in mobilizing transition. Hello, everyone. Good morning. First, thank you for inviting me so I can share with all of you the efforts of the Brazilian government and what we have been advancing towards the agenda of climate adaptation. So my name is Inamara Melio. I am the director of the Department of Adaptation and Resilience Policies. We have the mission, first, of updating the national plan of climate change in what concerns the climate adaptation agenda. We have already finished that work, by the way. We did our homework. Even we are here at COP, and we wanted to be here at COP with that already done and concluded, and we did. So now we are going to foster the implementation of that agenda that was developed alongside 25 ministries, the 16 sectorial plans with over 100 measures in order to reduce climate impacts in Brazil. I understand that the agenda towards climate change and adaptation is a multi-sectorial one. It's an agenda that deals with all the different spheres of our lives. We cannot not talk about that agenda anymore, be it in industry, in health, in tourism, by only using policies that do not encompasses all of that. And the agenda adaptation needs to be part at a very extensive set of programs and public policies. And that agenda is fundamental in order to reduce social vulnerabilities. It's focused and related to the agenda of the development. There's no development if we do not reduce vulnerabilities and if you're not ready, all of us, to work towards the context of climate change. So that's an important agenda, but unfortunately still underfinanced, underappreciated, and our role is precisely to bring more awareness and more focus to this agenda of climate change adaptation, because we understand that this is for all the different sectors of the economy. The economic agenda cannot be thought of something that is separated from climate change and adaptation, even in terms of capital and profitability. And at a level of society as a whole, a society that doesn't have a good quality of life and access to good basic services. This is not a society that are already ready for the development and economic development. That's what we have as a mission by dealing not only with the government policies, but also alongside state, municipalities, and bringing private sector, social society together.
It's a privilege. So I've been since COP18, and I wanted to get to a COP when we come with plans that are ready so that we can discuss how we're going to implement it. And I'm very afraid of making a decision in the board today that does not consider climatic risks, because I am sure that it's a bad decision, right, or bad definition. So let's go to a second round of questions. I'm going to try and put two questions together so you have more time to answer, because I think the great challenge is to show what we're already able to do. So I'm going to start with Patricia. Patricia, I think the other Patricia already talked about some of the emissions in the first panel. She talked about the challenges of creating solutions with this. So I wanted you to give us 2 points about Porto. How are we doing this to understand the phenomenon, as well as to make the product agenda or Porto more resilient? And Porto also recently launched this commitment with regeneration. So could you tell us a little bit about this, translating this into practice? What does it mean to Porto and the contribution that Porto is making in this transformation? Yes, I think you heard, Patricia, that everything starts with the measuring of our emissions. So in fact, the fact that we looked at scope 1, 2, and 3, we have innovated, and this allows us to have more assertiveness, to know what our impact is today. But from then on, we launched Regenera. Regenera is our commitment with care so that there will be a future. And I wanted to bring 3 examples of what we're working on today in this agenda. The first one is our commitment with a more sustainable economy. The second one, I wanted to talk about the role of insurance to make society more resilient. And the third one is how we prepare to support reconstruction when the disaster comes on. So how can we make our economy more circular? So Porto has, as part of the group, a company that is extremely important here that we're working with, and we invest in the work for us to recover in a sustainable manner the vehicles, and we actually recover these car parts and we recycle them. And this allows us to have more responsible discarding, more sustainable, and contributing in the circular economy. Now, within the context of this Mover program, it is very important to make viable the important recovery of the parts. But what I really wanted to discuss today is insurance inclusion, because today, when we think about Brazil and several economies around the world, we have what we call a gap in terms of protection. And this separates people, because after a natural catastrophe, the ones that are able to recover and reconstruct, and there are some that can't do it. Some can and some can't. And this gap in terms of protection is huge. So in 2024, we had natural disasters that caused $300 million in damage, and only 60% had insurance. So we're talking about $180 billion around the world that did not have this protection. And when we think about our role at Porto, that's exactly what we're thinking about. How can we increase people's resilience? So resilience, the capacity of recovering and reconstructing after an unpredicted event. It should not be a privilege. Resilience, in fact, is the basis of the economic development in our country. And we have asked ourselves, how are we actually able to bring insurance solutions so that the communities will count on the protection and be sure that when this windstorm comes or when the flood comes, we're going to be able to deal with it as quickly as possible. And that's why we have to work strongly in the innovation of products. That's what we've been doing, bringing insurance in a leaner way and with quality as well. So we work with protection from windstorms and also flooding, and also with the partnership of the other brokers. We are giving this insurance protection, and whenever a flood happens or a windstorm happens, the customers have the protection. So we have insurance for cars and motorcycles and homes. We've been working a lot on communication. And communication is not only communication about the insurance, we also work in communication and awareness of society about what can happen. So we have supporters of Casa Tempestade. It's a storm house. It's a series that talks about the impacts that natural cases can happen in Brazil, the natural disasters. So we're talking about the Amazon, the rivers, and the next season has come up in the History Channel about what happened in the South. And we have seen how this can be close to us and how this can have a very important impact on people. And then there's the third point, which is we start supporting the circular economy. We work on the insurance, and we also invest a lot so that when the natural disaster happens, we're going to be able to support society. And this is work that takes years of planning. It takes resources, investments. But when the disaster happens, we have teams that are prepared so that they can be quickly in the place. We have prompt answer teams. And this happened in Rio Grande do Sul last year. On some days, we had 200 people from Porto ready to help the customers and the society in general. We had people there with the aquatic motorcycles, and it was very important to have a prompt response, taking food and water and helping people to repair something at home. And this prompt response makes a whole difference. It was in Rio Grande do Sul. In the first month, we helped many people, and it's important, how we can be available to society when this happens. Because Rio Grande do Sul was a large event, but it's not the only one. We had situations in Paraná last week. So, we have to be ready through the inclusion, and with a prompt response, we can address people. So it's work of regenerating our commitment at the end of the day. So we have to contribute with reduction of emissions. We have targets for 2030. We have a commitment for in the chain as a whole, our whole value chain, so that we can contribute positively to emissions. And when we talk about insurance, we have a target. So we're going to bring 13 billion reais, billion with a B, of products that will make an impact and socially responsible and with growth and have more inclusion for insurance. That is extremely important for economic development in Brazil. Without resilience, in fact, it's very difficult to think about sustainability. So this is what Porto has as a commitment, and I'm very happy to be here at Casa do Seguro to talk about this commitment. I'm very happy to be with all three of you here to hear this, because here in Brazil, the number that Patricia brought shows that we have about 6% of coverage. So it's even lower than we thought. And it would be an opportunity to bring more resilience to the companies, to the public policies as we increase coverage. And we also increase the capacity of signaling when these events will happen. So this guarantees that we're not going to be as vulnerable to losses, and we will also have insurance beyond protection, almost as an alert system. So now I'm going to pass it on to Lu to guarantee more time for you. I'm going to ask you two questions. So Patricia talked a little about the targets and how important it is to have a clear commitment. Itaú announced a commitment of 400 million, and before getting to this date, 400 million in terms of funding, it was 1 trillion as a commitment. So I'd like you to talk about this and to say how you get to this contribution here in COP30, how the financial sector and banks sees the role, especially in terms of climatic funding. Well, when we announced the commitment of 400 billion, we had the objective of encouraging more projects and being able to make the customers look at Itaú as the bank of transition, as the bank that could be a partner in sustainable projects. And we were able to achieve our objective 1.5 years before. So there was a demand, repressed demand, and when we opened up the dialogue to make it possible to have 400 billion, we trained everyone in Itaú. So it's not the sustainability area talking to the customers. We actually introduced all of the knowledge from the sustainability area and all of our commercial area that has been talking to the companies and the customers every day, because many times the customers have a practice or a need to view the process or to replace the raw materials, but they don't really look at sustainability. And until then, we also had COP, and definitely there was this debate that was coming in at COP, and leaving the money on the table, and the return would be the same, and this would be, you know, something that you would observe to report this. So to have the identification of the opportunities and showing that the review of the process could generate targets for the business, environmental, social targets, there could be a governance structure that was more robust. This helped us modeling more projects with our customers, impact, and that's why 1 year and a half before we were able to get to 400 million. So to get to 400 billion, you know, so what is the next step? What is the next step out of all this? So we increased this to 1 trillion reais to 2030, and we have been intensifying this dialogue with our customers. But when we talk about climatic transition, and I talked about my introduction, so there's still a lot of questions in the sector, in the economic sector, about how this process is going to happen. So we need to create an incentive according to the rates, according to the timelines, so that we can anticipate this plan. So for the future of the company, for them to do this in the present. And the more we anticipate actions that include revision of processes, or looking at companies that are more sustainable, more generative, more resilient. The more resilient the company is going to be. For the bank, it's great because this reduces the risk. So we're able to have rates. You know, we're able to look at easier payment for these customers. So we established some ESG products on the shelf, so general products, and these are things that, you know, today I used an expression, it's not solutions of, you know, it's not rocket science, they're just simple solutions. When we look at logistics, just, you know, replacing the fleets of buses and trucks, this reduces emissions because the engine is the least emissions it makes. I'm not even talking about electrification. I'm not talking about the new biomethane techniques that are also welcome. We have encouraged this in our customers, but having a differentiated rate with better payment terms. So maybe he's going to replace the fleet that is something he was only going to do 5 years from now. You know, that is an opportunity. So it's all these opportunities, encouraging the customer to choose these practices. And when they do that, we can look at their companies in a more resilient and more sustainable way. And you have the medium and long term. You know, it's 10 years and we have enhanced terms. So we also have a specific shelf for agribusiness. So we have the coverage lines, and that's between the seasons. So you have other covering cultures, you maintain carbon in the soil, you maintain the humidity, and as a result, you're able to show the next ones, and we're going to have better use for the next culture, of the soil for the next cultures. So we have introduced this in Brazil, and then we say, okay, so in your production, if you guarantee that you're going to have the grass, the coverage of your land, then you're going to have longer term for payment. So he has a financial incentive behind that. And we believe that sustainability has to be economically feasible for everyone, but banks have to create instruments for that. And our main thing with agribusiness, is the partnership that we have with Syngenta and TNC. So Syngenta brings the producers the technical assistance, and TNC guarantees compliance, the environmental one as well as the social one. one, and there's a differentiated rate, and there's a waiting period that is even longer for payment. And then they're able to recover degraded land, land that is used for pasture, and they can actually plant in these areas. And in 2021, we had a pilot, so we didn't really talk about it, but we were able to invest more than 2 billion reais only in Reverte in this program. We have 260,000 hectares of land being recovered. And it's interesting because it was a program that, was a word of mouth. We didn't have to talk to the producers. So he looked at his neighbor and said, what are you doing that is different? Yeah, but how much are they paying? No, I'm going to pay in 3 years only. Only when I have my harvest here from this culture, that's when I'm going to be able to pay the credit. So as a financial system, we need to, 1 trillion is a trillion that we've been working with, but we are aware that we have to create the adequate financial incentives. And we have to come out of that basic shelf that we've always had. We have to understand, okay, how can I move the other side? How can I bring the customer? Because the economic moment we're going through in the country brings lots of challenges. So they're not going to have an additional cost to get into this transition journey. But if you show them that there is a differentiated rate, they're going to have parties, collaboration, and I believe in this arrangement that we have in this Reverte program. You can get the bigger players from the other chains, and you find financial solutions for the bottlenecks that fit into the pocket of the transport companies, in terms of sanitation, the farmers. And to conclude, I think that this last year we've had great advances with public policies. And I think it's very important what happened. It was the Treasury line, Eco-Invest. And as the financial system, we had talked about this, but it was very difficult to do something in a scalable manner, which is blended finance, where you bring public and private capital to the famous catalytic capital. So it's for those initiatives that still need to be tested, and they are ready. So you have an interest rate that is much more competitive. So the Treasury launched Eco-Invest, and the fourth bid was in COP for the Amazon region. So first of all, there was a bigger view, there was renewable energy, sanitation, there were several projects that caused an impact. Very specific ones. The second one was the recovery of degraded areas, including more biomas, also Caatinga. And this is interesting. How do we look at all these biomas? So wealth on the one hand, and what are the challenges to reduce deforestation? And there was also one about hedges to get more resources safely, and also the Amazon. And what was interesting in Eco-Invest, it was a line where we have huge benefit to give to the customer. So that was interesting because we were able to have more capital, catalytic capital at their disposal. And for every real that we got from the Treasury, we had the leverage for all of the editorials. So first of all, for every 1 real that I got from the Treasury, I had to get 6 of foreign investment, 6 reais. And we had zero difficulty with that because it's a public policy, and it also comes in. We had talked about sustainable taxonomy in Brazil. We approved the law of carbon in the market. So when we show the whole package, this definitely gives us not only legal safety to the financial system, but it shows how much economic resilience we're bringing to our country about this subject. So foreign capital came in. We were able to use it in different projects. And we believe that now it's a new chapter in blended finance. So we're going to look at the financial system, looking at the catalytic capital, but always in partnership with the public policies, with the government, so that we will be able to make these large movements of transformation. Great. It's great. Great to have this live. And I think Lou brought this point that I can pass over to you. So Brazil Investment Platform was launched 2 COPs ago. And all of this to say that below this strategy for Brazil of public policies and the institutional structure that allows the area to move forward in a coordinated manner, we've had another 10 countries here in COP that looked at platforms. They launch platforms inspired in the Brazilian platform. So it's nice to have this COP here in Brazil, and we're able to show not only our opportunity for our solution, but also how we can mobilize resources also in our economy for the new economy and for the socio-bioeconomy. So these standing forests that don't leave anyone behind, that value people. And with this structure, I'm going to move on to Inamara. So you talked about the role of this public policy and how much we structured ourselves for this, but you brought a point that is a little more subtle, and it's gaining more perspective, which is climatic justice. So how can we do that? Touching on the speed of transition and not only making the new technologies get there to solve the current problems, but, so they don't consider, as you said, they don't consider that those who are already vulnerable, they're not going to become even more vulnerable at this moment. So how can public policies help to make these transitions, not only in terms of insurance and funding, but for them to become more accessible, for them to reach this vulnerable population instead of transferring the climatic risk to them? Denise, so you talked about several aspects, and I think that from what Luciana said, we have to start on the following point. We have to be proud of it. Brazil today provides climatic solutions, and it has shown robust public policies to deal with this new context. Now, in the mitigation agenda, in the adaptation agenda, and also ways of implementing instruments that are quite innovative, and they can act today as an example for many countries around the world. Now, before we go directly into your question, I have some information that I think is extremely important before we talk about climatic justice. So all the climatic funding around the world is basically for the mitigation agenda. Of course, it's important for us to reduce the greenhouse gases and to hold back global warming. Otherwise, it becomes even more difficult to have the adaptation of this agenda. But what we're talking about in terms of asymmetries is about 93% of the funding that goes to the mitigation agenda, and less than 10% goes to the adaptation agenda in terms of climate change. So we're still dealing with climatic funding and from what is faster. So in terms of the logic of the business, and we have to understand the adaptation agenda to promote climatic justice, to promote development, and using the logic that if we don't adapt, everybody is going to lose as a result. And this is not an environment for business and to promote the economy itself. So we need the adaptation agenda for the change in climate. And this world trend in terms of the symmetry between resources for mitigation and adaptation, this also happens in Brazil. And we have 80% here in the country in terms of funding for mitigation, while the adaptation agenda is close to 20%. But we understand that it's very little compared to what we need to do. And obviously, this makes the agenda for promotion of climatic justice even more challenging. So over here, we got some data, some information about climatic disasters, damage that happened in Brazil. 84% of the Brazilian municipalities were affected over the last decade. And what we have in terms of data and information about families that were impacted, it's 340 million people who suffered an impact. It's more than the Brazilian population because one person can be affected more than once. That's why. So all of this makes it difficult to follow this agenda, and we have to redirect this look at the climatic funding. So it's not possible to only look at the business agenda anymore. We need to, instead of work on the funding, the climatic funding in general, we have to understand the ethical responsibility with the agenda of promotion of the economic development. So Thank you very much. Yeah, so for me, for us, it's a need, and adaptation, the adaptation agenda talks a lot more about social issues, but these social issues are not smaller. They are not unnecessary. The social agenda needs to be seen, it needs to be contemplated, and social investments also need to be enhanced. Of course, it's very difficult to ally the adaptation agenda with the financial market. But of course, in this plan that we present, more than 800 measures to reduce the climatic impacts, there are business opportunities. So there are possibilities of dealing with an alliance of the public power and private initiative. And we're working not only with the measures for the federal government, but also in incentivating the municipalities and cities for them to have local plans for adaptation, so that the adaptation agenda can be closer to those private players or the measures that should be adopted in the territories, in the cities where 87% of the population live and produce. 87% of the population is in the cities. So having said that, we believe that Brazil, that has Adapta Cidades, the program of adaptation in the cities, and helping the municipalities to adapt to this strategy, our country is moving forward so that we have local plans, local measures, and for them to receive support and the partnership of private initiative in a more concrete manner, considering the adaptation to climate changes in this agenda. And to conclude, I'd like to say that this agenda of climatic governance that is multi-levels, that has multi-sectors, it's participative, it needs to have the private sector integrated, also placing their issues and their interests and talking to the social agenda, talking to the municipal agenda, the agenda that needs to move forward so that we'll be able to have resilient cities and developed cities, and we'll be able to bring the perspective of development for Brazil. So we had climatic justice elected as the pillar that is north to climate adaptation. And we understand that the population that is most vulnerable, most affected, this population needs to be a priority in this process. And it's not possible to do that if you don't have a social pact and a political pact around this agenda. Brazil needs to move forward, and moving forward is not only for some. Either we all move forward, looking for better cities, more resilient cities, with the population included, and leaving behind the context of slums and people who live with risks, absolute risk, or otherwise we won't be able to move forward. So climatic justice happens from this social and political impact. Thank you. Well, congratulations. So we're ready for another round, but the importance of what you brought in terms of multi-level governance and the coordination of the plans between the public and private sector, the people who provide financing, and civil society, well, that's what COP brings. COP has this model of activity, and maybe now we're talking about implementation, safe implementation. And something that I would like to, that I heard, is that it's not a safe world for everyone. You know, it doesn't work. So that's why we were here. We needed thousands of people to be here, guaranteeing different points of the chain, living in different areas of the world, of the country. And if they are not safe in terms of temperature to live, and basic conditions, basic health conditions, and access to products and services, and included in this transformation, basically we're not going to do it at the speed that we need it to be. So that's the risk. So I would like to thank you for your contribution and for the agenda of interlocution in this panel. So I think we can see in Casa do Seguro the sector working in an articulated manner, maybe working on traditional products in a different way to solve problems. So you gave 3 examples. And in general, contemplating the partnership in the implementation of the public policy and in the articulation. So I think it's interesting to look at cities because almost all of our products in Porto, they operate with this kind of logic in the cities, right? If it is car or home insurance or health insurance. Another topic that is also part of COP, and there are important arguments here, but I think it's a little more than 5 minutes, but I wanted to hear from each of you your final remarks. So what you have seen in COP until now and your contribution and what you expect. Because on Friday, we're going to be able to do it on Friday, and next Monday, we're going to start working on the implementation, right? Because COP is not the end. It's just one point. It's not a start. It's not the end. It is a point where we meet so that we can coordinate the next steps locally and also globally. So Patricia, starting with you. I wanted to reinforce the topic of climatic justice. That's fundamental, as you said. So in a world where it's safe for some and not for others, it's not safe for anyone. In a world where there's a gap in terms of protection, where part of the population is able to recover and reconstruct after a natural disaster, a natural catastrophe, and part of the population is not able to do that, that means we don't have resilience. So I just wanted to reinforce, going back to Lou and Inamara's point, the public-private partnership is extremely important at this point. And how do we do that? It starts with us. We have to look at our business and we have to maintain strong commitments with carbon reduction. So once again, we're talking about Renova, about circular economy of the car parts and looking at our chain. And that's important. We have to look at that. And it's also important in COP30 to get partnerships in the future that will allow us to accelerate this journey. Because as we've said, these points are happening and they are weekly. And if we don't act faster, the next event, it will be the same point of vulnerability. And in this case, we talked about the leaner products and funding directed at those who really need it. And, in the insurance market, we have several resources, and one is data. So we work basically to help the population and the community. And when there is an unpredicted action, during these decades of story, we have accumulated the data. And from there, we can get the greatest potential risks, and we can see what can potentially happen. So I'd like to reinforce our commitment to the market with the public sector of putting our data, making our data available, not only to mitigate and reconstruct, but to reconstruct in a better way, for us to really direct resources and what is necessary, right? And as a market, as CNseg as well, and CNseg and Porto, we are really in this agenda where we actually want to reconstruct better. So once again, I would like to sign this commitment with Regenera, also our commitment with the market. And from this COP on, we're going to continue building together. So you said it very well. We don't do anything by ourselves, right, Lou? And we have to do it together and do it better. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you, Patricia. Just to mention what Patricia just said, I think when it comes to data, it's something that is really important, especially because we know that if on one hand, the emitting factors of Brazil in terms of the quality of the soil and the agriculture that we have been trying to find solutions for, the ones who are more impacted are the people in the city, in the biggest urban centers. And the vision for adaptation is something that all of us contribute towards the most challenging events of the city, not only what happened in the south of Brazil, in Rio Grande do Sul, we have what just happened in Paraná as well. So to help the public powers at the cities, I believe that we have good policies at the federal level, some of the state levels, but there's still a lot of municipalities that are struggling. So to have that vision of rebuilding under the point of view of adaptive goals, it's better so we can help them build faster, and we also are able to bring some data and information that we have towards that. From Itaú, we have been able to help through these biggest events, not only by looking at the event at the moment with the humanitarian help and getting water and all of that, but when the media leaves, the people needs to retake that normal life. And there are several economic impacts as well that happen afterwards, because we send a lot of donations at first, but then but that slows down the local economy. And we need to think how we're going to replace that local economy to help it regain its power faster. And we have so much data, so much information that comes for the insurers that work with this risk map, and it can combine everything that they have in terms of information about probability of risk and how it's going to happen, the intensity of that disaster. So we need to learn how we were able to help the cities, because we know that the public power alone cannot help this huger impact that happens in all the different sectors across the economy. And every single extreme event, the most vulnerable ones are the most impacted. We know that. So we need to know how we help that adaptation process to getting the help that is needed, so that when the media leaves, we're still there, we're still trying to help a economic recovery that is important locally. And I'm really happy of what I'm seeing at COP right now, because one of the biggest challenges that we have is to engage more people. If my customer is not engaged, my job it doesn't move forward. I cannot sell solutions, credits. And by walking through the blue zone and green zone and here at the House of Insurance, I've been seeing a lot of new faces. I've been participating in previous COPs, and I always find the same people that are going to different COPs and events. And having COP at Brazil, because I have met so many new CEOs and CFOs in blue zone and the green zone, that is amazing. So we are living here with a more engaged private initiative, because everybody that comes to COP, when they go back to their companies, something changed in them. They want to see things happen. They want to see solutions taking place. And since this is a COP of implementation, we have a lot of solutions being discussed cross-sectoral. And it's important because COP doesn't end here. It doesn't end at the last day. COP Brazil worked until the next COP. So how do we take the legacy of what's being discussed right now into the next COP? That's important. And when you look at the agenda of climate financing, I think there's still a lot of challenges there. I was very happy because the first day we opened with a meeting to discuss about the multilateral bank reform, because we know that it's very important in order to take resources and channel resources for the countries that need it the most, that has more challenges towards transition, because I think Brazil can definitely export a lot of what's being doing here, because we know that resources is important. And André Corrêa do Lago said that. He brought that to agenda. The challenge is not only for the governments. We're going to need the governments, the multilateral banks, private initiative in order to channel the amount of money that is necessary in order to make this transition happen. And that also brings the important engagement with everyone, for everyone to understand where they can contribute. And lastly, I believe that the SDGs are going to need to be more and more ambitious with everything they were able to deliver now. We finally reached 2.3, if I'm not mistaken. So we still have a lot of job ahead of us to return to 1.5. And I believe that the carbon market can be a good ally when it brings an emission ceiling. And I think that the Brazilian government was able to bring a lot of important things here when it comes to the global market of carbon. That is how we, in Brazil, with all the generated carbon credits, to access international markets and pay people that have been doing a good job in reducing their emissions in Brazil. So I think we're living here with a lot of great things ahead of us, and there's still a week and a half ahead, right? But I'm already very happy with everything that I've seen. Me as well, and it was been great to hear the word mutirão, collective. Mutirão is a Portuguese word that basically means collective, and to hear that word being spoken across so many different countries. I as well understand that during this decisive week, we have a lot of things in the negotiation agenda that we have been waiting for, both in the definitions towards the adaptation agenda, and we've also been waiting about the insertion of a path towards the future in order to move from fossil fuels, but I always have the same enthusiastic spirit, and I share the same spirit and excited spirit from Luciana and Patricia when it comes to the things that we already achieved through this COP. I think that the presidency of COP in Brazil did a great job in presenting the action agenda and positioning as the COP of implementation. Also, President Lula did a good job in defending this COP to happen at the heart of the Amazon, and talking about that agenda here in this place is emblematic. It's definitely going to be a huge milestone. And it has defended a huge mobilization as well in Brazil and outside, not only for people here in the city of Belém. We've also seen a huge movement for companies, social movements, governments, in order to present actions and measures for all of us to advance in the climate agenda. So I believe that we truly have a lot of great achievements in terms of climate policies in Brazil by having this COP. We gain a lot of great things throughout different sectors. But we also have the expectation in advancing more in terms of implementation. So my invitation that I leave for all of you is for the climate plan to go through the decisive moments, the moment of implementation. It's 16 sectorial plans with 9 goal national objectives and 3 guidelines. All of that should be used to guide the ministries and also the agenda of the social movements, the private sector agenda, the subnational government agenda. We need to make sure that this national strategy towards climate that Brazil is presenting as being the guiding path that is going to help Brazil to reach 2025 following the agenda that doesn't end here at COP in Brazil. We hope to advance in this next decade in a very decisive way and in a very robust way once Brazil needs this type of implementation. We are a very vulnerable country to climate events and impacts, and we need all of us to understand that all these policies need to happen, and it needs to be seen in the cities, in the territories, and in all the different sectors. We had this public call so that all the public policies incorporate the climatic point of view. And we extend the invitation to all the sectors to do that as well, guiding themselves through the climate plan and the strategy that Brazil is presenting for the year 2035. So we are living here very excited, waiting for better days ahead, days which we can have an agenda implemented in order to make Brazil more resilient and more sustainable. I think we can do that. I think that our country only works, it's possible, will work, it's possible. It depends on all of us. That's the Brazil that we want for COP, right? And NFCCC was born at ECHO 92, and an event in Brazil, right? It all started here. And now we have a lot of technologies, a lot of collaboration, so many public policies, transparent, available in order to be monitored and incorporated. And me, in the spirit of the mutirão, of the collective, I hope that we're not the last generation that could have done something about it, but the first one to actually feel the effects, because that's what we're seeing now, but also that we're the first generation that was able to do something about it and start implementing change. Thank you all for the panel. We are here, and I'd like to thank Porto CNseg for allowing this to happen. Thank you. Thank you so much for all the participants and Porto for building these 2 amazing panels that we just seen this morning. Don't forget that at the end of the day, there will be a cocktail offered by Porto, and all of you are welcome. I'll also like to extend my special thanks for all the empowers of Casa do Seguro House of Insurance, Allianz, AXA, BB Seguros, Caixa Seguridade, Bradesco, Mafre, Marsh McLennan, Prudential, Tóquio Marine. Now, we will have our lunch break, and at 3, we will be back with our agenda for the afternoon. Have a great day, a great afternoon. See you soon.